What's happening, everybody? Welcome to episode 45 of Stick to Hockey Live. It's our first, the inaugural. Oh, you broke your cherry. It's the Flyers Fan Forum. And we've got three guests that'll join us in just a moment. Flyer fans, we're going to have a very impactful conversation. And the reason why I did this, I've been wanting to do this for a while, especially this year, because of where the team is. And I know a lot of people get their point across and their opinions across on social media, but social media is so limiting and so much left up for interpretation. The spoken word is usually much better. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. Let me tell everybody about Conquerville Subaru and something else I got to mention before we start as well. Conquerville Subaru, fantastic dealership on Route 202 in Glen Mills. I bought my first car there back in 1989. Oh my goodness, I drove it to the ground, and many cars since. And my son still chomping at the bit to get there, but he's got the permit, not the license. So Conquerville Subaru, it's Conquerville Cares, but why do they say that? Well, it's not just a saying. It's because they actually do. They were the first Subaru Nation Love Promise Dealer of the Year winner back in 2015. They got 8 years supporting the Nemours Children's Hospital of Delaware. They've got 10 years supporting La Humanidad Hispania, donating coats in Kennett Square. Also, the 15 classrooms that they adopt every year at Marcus Hook Elementary School, providing $500 each for classroom supplies that the teachers get to pick. It's a fantastic dealership, and they do great work in the community. So you got to get down there, check out all the certified pre-owned inventory on the lot, all the new Subaru vehicles on the lot. They're sensational. Take one for a test drive. Check out the service department when you're there as well. Get a free car wash with every visit. So you got to see the facilities, meet the people. As great as they are as a dealership, they're even better in the work they do in the community. So visit ConquervilleSubaru.com. Check them out on Route 202 in Glen Mills, and remember that Conquerville cares. Also, before we get started, I just want to mention this because I see this news coming down today that Vox Media and I guess it's SB Nation had a ton of layoffs today, and I know that affects everybody over at Broad Street Hockey in a big way, apparently. I don't know what the future is. I don't know if they know what their future is at this point, but no matter what you feel about anybody, I like the people at Broad Street Hockey. I think they do a good job. It sucks to see people lose their livelihood and lose this avenue because ultimately it's created and consumed by the fans. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I hope the best for them. So I'm very sorry to hear that news coming up today. I saw that on Twitter this morning. Let's get to our Flyers Fan Forum. Let's bring in our guests right now. We've got three gentlemen, not young gentlemen, I will say. We've got Dan Marcus. We've got Mitchell M. and Brian, is it Citino?
It is. You nailed it, Jay.
Oh, my goodness. I thought I would fuck that up. But I didn't. So what's going on, boys? Let's kind of go around the room here. We'll start with Danny. Dan, you and I go back and forth quite a bit through DM, and you're like the brother I've never met, and we debate and we talk about all kinds of different things when it comes to hockey and the Flyers. What got you into this whole mess?
Well, Jace, before we start, I just wanted to thank you for hosting this. Talking on behalf of Flyer fans everywhere, you're so accessible. I sometimes feel that your Flyer daily sessions are like therapy sessions for the fan base, and the fact that you're doing this and you DM with us, it's really terrific. So I wanted to just start out by thanking you on behalf of everybody here.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just briefly introduce myself in terms of my Flyer fandom. Full disclosure, I grew up, I'm not in the market, actually. I'm originally a Long Islander, and now I live in northern New Jersey. But my entrance was quite some time ago. Jason, like you, I'm a goalie nerd. And back in the day, they had a pretty good goalie named Bernie Parent. So Bernie drew me in. Their cool Halloween colors for a young kid was pretty cool as well. And, of course, just loving the way they played, the way they stuck up for one another, their honest play. They had a passionate owner. I've never seen a guy like Bobby Clark energize a fan base or a game the way he did. So I start back then, and I remain a Flyer fan today.
Nice. Mitchell, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm also out of market now. I grew up, outside of Philly. Now I live in Pittsburgh, so the other side of the state, which is a lot of fun. But I got into hockey. I have to give a lot of credit to my dad. He grew up playing, and I grew up watching him play and started playing myself. So just being around the area, really started following the Flyers. And, my dad took me to all the games and all that kind of jazz. My first, memory as a Flyers fan is like the one that really cemented it was driving home, listening on the radio to the Flyers Ottawa Senators game where there were all the penalties and all the fights. We were speeding home, so we could get to the TV. My sisters were watching something. We tossed them off and watched that. And I was just watching that, thinking to myself, this is awesome. Like I'm in this for the long haul. And ups and downs, which there have been plenty of over the past couple of years. But, now I rep my guys out in Pittsburgh pretty strongly, and I take some heat for it, but, that's part of the game.
Yeah, it's not an easy time to do it out there in Pittsburgh for the last bunch of years. You got to listen to that Mark Madden douchebag.
I don't listen to him at all. I refuse to give him the energy. I've seen some of his takes and some of the things he said about Flyers, and I'm just like, I don't even need to do it.
Yeah, he's a slob. Let's go to Brian. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, so Mitchell, actually, I was at that Senators game.
Were you?
When I was one of the craziest environments I've ever been in. But similar
5
to Mitchell,
minutes left in the third. We'll be home by 10:30.
It was
at midnight.
Yeah, it was like an hour and a half to just get through that last 4 minutes in that game. Yeah. It was wild. But yeah, so similar to Mitchell, my dad actually got me into hockey. He played growing up in the in the Bullies era, and then my brother and I started playing street hockey and things like that when I was around 8. And that just so happened to coincide with around 92, 93 when, Lindros came into the market. So, it was kind of the era when, there weren't as many devices sitting around. So when it was 7 o'clock in the house, Dad controlled the TV and the Flyers went on. So like it or not, that's what you were watching. And, getting to watch Lindros and those teams, that's what really kind of cemented it for me. And it didn't hurt that they were consistently one of the best 5 teams in the league in that era. So I was a little bit spoiled with my entry into my fandom.
Yeah, it's interesting because Lindros was such a spectacle. I think he brought a lot of fans to the table because whenever he stepped on the ice, like you couldn't not watch him. It was like, look at this. I mean, he's so big, so skilled. I can't imagine if he played in the league today because I think he'd be suspended all the time. They would assume hits were dirty because he was so strong. Which kind of is a great transition to bring us to really our first topic here, which is the current state of the team and the franchise. And, you mentioned Lindros, Brian, and, he was generational talent. He was a guy a superstar, elite talent. And that's the thing that this team seems to lack. So let's start with you, Brian, here. Since you brought up Lindros, you get the first bat at it. But the current state of the team, when you look at it and you look at what they do have, what they have coming, and some draft capital and other things, how do you kind of assess the state of the Flyers at this current moment?
Yeah, I don't think it's as dire, Jason, as some people make it out to be. I don't think it's great. There seemed to be a little bit over the past year, too many changings of direction with what they wanted to do, too many mixed messages. That's just us as fans. Jason, you say it all the time, don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. But it has been, the shift a few times here has been a little bit unnerving as a fan because you don't really see the path forward. We've been one of the worst teams in the league for a couple of years now. And then one of the more mediocre teams in the league for about a decade now. And it almost seems like the path right now is from worser team in the league back to this path of mediocrity. With that said, I don't think there isn't a way out here. And I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later. What would we suggest doing to improve things? But I don't think it's as dire as some people think. I just think there needs to be some creativity in what happens over the next, let's just say 18 months here from now until the end of next season into, 2024 draft to really kind of get this ship righted where we're not going through an 8-10 year rebuild, but we're also not going through a 1-2 year retool. But 4 or 5 years from now, we're back on, we're through those 4 or 5 years, we're on the path to respectability and then contending again at the end of that.
Mitchell, you're in Pittsburgh. You see the Penguins. They've managed to keep the window open. I don't know how. We've all been calling for their demise for a long time. It hasn't happened. Hextall goes there and he, re-signs Malkin, re-signs Letang. and acquires Carter and extends them. You see what's happening there. We all see it, and we all kind of go, can this thing end already? But as long as they have Crosby, I think they're going to keep pushing. What's your view kind of on the state of the franchise?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with, it's not as dire as it seems. I think this year a couple of the younger guys took some necessary steps, and that makes me feel a little better. I mean, it seems like we're sitting in this 6 to 10 draft spot, right? And I don't know if that's where we want to be, but there's got to be some changes made, I think. And I think you also hit the nail on the head with the no clear direction. It seems like there's been a lot of mixed signals. I feel like I'm in high school again with girls with how many mixed signals we're getting, right? So what I really want is just a clear plan. And I think some changes need to be made first, and then that plan can be enacted. But as a fan, I've had a lot of friends that are, the semi-fans that come in when they're good and go out when they're bad. And I've been saying for years that, we're only a couple of years away, right? And I feel like a lot of us have been saying that. And, it's tough to see these guys come and go, but, I'm sticking through it. But, I think we're less of a shorter time frame than what we thought, to being at least competitive, but I don't want to be just competitive. I want to be, one of the top teams. You see some of these teams at the top every year, Boston and Tampa, Colorado for the past couple of years. I would like to be there again. So, I think there's some changes that need to be made. I've said that a couple times, but I agree. I don't think it's as dire as what you see on Twitter and Facebook and that sort of thing.
So it's not scorched earth, Danny. You look at it and, the pandemic probably, skewed some thinking in a lot of ways. And that 1920 season under AV gave people a lot of hope. I mean, they have that second half of that season. They go to the playoffs, whatever. They win that number one seed in that little round robin. That was stupid. But and then winning a round of the playoffs, going to 7 against the Islanders, even though the Islanders really controlled them. But it turns out that we thought that maybe they were closer to that team and some moves could get them back there, but that hasn't been the case. That looked like an outlier. So what do you got on the state of the franchise?
Hey, well, guys, I'm going to be a little harsher here. You mentioned Lindros, which it was a spectacular time. I think before Lindros came to Philadelphia, they missed the playoffs 5 consecutive years, which they'd never done before,
including his first, I think, 2 years.
That's right, Jace. That's very good. Guys, I would say that I'm in agreement with what you said, but my main problem is you guys have heard the term "a fish stinks from its head." I have zero faith in this ownership group, in this front office, in this general manager. I want a new owner. I want a new front office. I want a new GM. I don't trust this GM to do anything. He's inept. So until that changes, I have little to no hope that this will turn around because I don't trust him to do it. You might ask, Jace, who should be in there? I don't know if we want to get into that now, but we need to get it. We need to get a high functioning assistant GM in a big program like what a Pat Verbeek did, or an Eric Tulsky in Carolina, or what Tom Fitzgerald now is doing now in Jersey, where he was an assistant GM under a successful program elsewhere. Until the head changes, nothing will change.
So you think it's just basically the team going to be spinning, picking a direction based on a spinning wheel, basically? Yeah,
the mushy middle, Jace. They've also made it clear that the business side, they're not getting playoff gates, and they're gonna do the throwback nights. They're gonna do the Billy Leno stuff and the milkshakes. They'll make money, but they're no longer marketing to people like me who want one thing: a Stanley Cup. They're now marketing to people, the assembly room, have a good time. They're no longer marketing to old guys like me and you, Jay. Sorry to say that.
Yeah, no, I am old. You're right.
But the hope for me is incredibly bleak unless something has changed drastically at the top. And that's not even Danny Briere to me either. So that's my view.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of teams. You saw what Florida did in hiring Bill Zito, who was a former agent and was an assistant GM in Columbus under Jarmo Kekalainen. And you see the hiring of Ken Hughes in Montreal, another former agent. I think the former agent thing's really interesting because I think the league is, in a salary cap league, how you pay players. I don't think anybody knows player value better than agents, even though they try to inflate their players' value, of course. But they know that game better than anyone. I always think that angle is very interesting. But when it comes to marketing to certain groups, every business does that. It's annoying because they don't market to the people that keep the lights on. They market to the people they want to add.
Right.
It's the hey, let's have the early bird special so that we can get more people that usually aren't our customers to come in, or it happens in all kinds of businesses. The regulars at the bar, they're there every day. It doesn't matter if it's, dollar drinks. They're there every day, but they're trying to bring all these other people, and then it crowds out the regulars.
Jason, great analogy.
Yeah, it's crazy. When you look at what they have to do from a drafting standpoint, Brent Flair's the guy that runs the draft. He's kind of connected at the hip with Chuck Fletcher, and he's a guy that, when you look at Minnesota, a lot of what Minnesota has is basically the work that Brent and Chuck did there. How have you guys kind of looked at the drafting of the team? We'll start with you, Mitchell, because drafting and developing are a huge part. You look at a team like Tampa, Kucherov taken 58th, Braden Point taken I think 79th. Those were great finds. Steve Yzerman was there when that happened. They drafted those guys, got them developed. I don't know how much developing Kucherov needed, but maybe Point did. But when you look at it, what about the drafting of this team, with guys like Cutter Gauthier and, other guys in the system, Cam York, we go back, we look at the Caulfield, double skip on him. What have you guys thought of the drafting, Mitchell?
Yeah, I think the drafting has been all right. I'm not thrilled with it. I'm not completely, entirely disappointed with it. I mean, I understand that we needed to replenish some of the defensive prospects when we took York, I think, in the first round. And I feel like you hear this all the time, but in the first round, the higher end rounds, you want to draft on talent. You take the best player available. And I don't think we necessarily did that. I mean, Caulfield's got 20 plus goals so far this year. He's killing it. And he's been on an upward trend, and we look at York, and York's, he's impressed me too, for what he's been allotted for.
Yeah, it takes a deal longer than it takes a winger too.
Right, for sure.
Develop the NHL for sure.
So I do like what I've seen from York. I think he's impressed me at times. I think he's got a lot to learn, but again, I agree. It takes them longer, but I still think some of that asset management that we've done, using picks on players when there were better players available, trading some of the draft capital, some of those moves that we've made don't really make sense. We traded a couple picks with Ghost to get rid of him, and then we kind of replaced Ghost with TDA, who, very similar type player, maybe a little bit more feistiness to him, but we traded, 3 picks, I think, for him. So a 5-pick swing to get a similar player. That doesn't really make sense to me. So the asset management there with draft capital has been confusing to me, to say the least.
Hey, can we stick on Ghost for a second? Because let me ask you guys this about Ghost. Because he was waived. Nobody, as you guys know, I am not a big Ghost fan.
Mm-hmm. You've never made that clear before, Jason.
No, never. He wasn't a fan of me either, apparently. The feeling was mutual. Because when I was on the radio, after his second year, I was pretty critical of him because I thought he was a guy that was easy to adjust to. And he went out and had a 65-point season. But after that, anyway, certainly he's got great offensive game and instincts and execution there. The thing is, for him, is he a net positive player? Because, he was waived here. Any team could have grabbed him for free. Nobody did. He was put on the trade market that offseason, basically for a 6th-round pick. Nobody traded for him. You had to sweeten it to send him somewhere. Yeah, he's in Arizona and he puts up decent numbers, but it's Arizona. It doesn't mean anything. That hockey doesn't mean much out there. So, when it comes to Ghost, and I get people didn't want to send out an asset with him. I mean, the other element of the equation with Ghost is 3 coaches went through him. Couldn't get him to play a team game at all.
Right.
I mean, from I'm not even just talking head coaches. I'm talking D coaches, Gord Murphy, guys that have been in this game for a very, very long time, just couldn't get him to do the right things.
I think, Jason, it's easy to look back in hindsight and say, attaching the assets to that was the wrong move. And I do believe it was the wrong move. To echo what Dan said earlier, I don't really have much faith in this hockey ops department. I think they did what they had to do, but I think they misread the room. I think that they kind of looked at the situation that the team was in. I believe that was coming out of the bubble when Ghost got moved. Mm-hmm. And they thought, all right, we're close. We can afford to give up some assets here because we're close, and we can unload this guy and fill around elsewhere. Whereas I almost
think flat cap too, so you had to consider I can fill that role with a lesser salary.
Exactly. Yep. Flat cap. So flat cap's a huge part of it, but and that kind of leads into what I'm going to say here, which is it would have made just as much sense, I think, to eat money on him. Instead of attaching assets to it. Mm-hmm. I get why they didn't, because they thought they were close. And obviously with the flat cap, that was so, any bit of space was so valuable. So if you get an extra $2 million on him, say you eat 50, I think he was making 4.5.
Yeah.
But you get another 2.25, but you still have 2.25 tied up. Yeah. That's a little bit of a deterrent to making that move. I think that the bubble was, that season was a bit of smoke and mirrors, which led them to believe they were closer than they actually were. And again, in hindsight, I think you can make the same trade without attaching the assets and just eat the money. And
problem is, if you're eating the money, now you're eating up part of your cap on flat cap, and you're trying to push to get better.
Right. You're trying to push to get better, but that's what I mean by reading the room, is seeing like your window wasn't opening. Your window actually was slamming shut at that point. Giroux and Voracek and those guys who I'd loved, but
I disagree with that. Based on that season, I mean, they were, if you look at the underlying numbers and everything, they were a legit team that year under AV. I don't think that I would have read the room that way either. I looked at it and said, I would have said, we got a good team, we got a good coach, and then for some reason, after the bubble, the fucking floor fell out.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no way to predict that, I guess. Yeah. But, and it's like I said, it's all hindsight. I don't hate the Ghost trade.
Yeah, we should. I don't even know why we're spending some time on that. That's probably my fault. But you look at some of the moves. To you guys' point, though, and Danny, you look at some of the moves that they've made, and they have attached assets to them. Or the other part of the equation when it comes to building a team is deciding what to do with guys when their contracts are up, either RFA or to restricted free agents. And when you have a team that's been down for multiple seasons now in a big way, it's not just a little off, it's way off. And then you're extending guys that are part of that group. That's a problem that people have. I remember going back to the one year they extended Lawton at the deadline, and there was a lot of people critical of that. My thought on that was that it wasn't a big signing for big money, and the cost per replacement would have been much higher. So I was okay with that. But there's other ones, like obviously Ristolainen, and you can look at Sanheim this year and others that you kind of scratch your head at and go, man, why did they extend guys that were part of a team that didn't get it done?
Jace, I can respond to that one. Yeah, I mean, I took a couple of notes here. If Couturier, Sanheim, and Lawton, complete their current contracts, they will have spent 18, 14, and 12 years as Flyers. Bobby Clark spent 15 years as a Flyer. He's obviously a two-time Stanley Cup champion, Hall of Famer. Why do they feel the need to extend, in all due respect, average players, bottom six type players, second, when we all know they need?
You're not suggesting Couturier is that, are you?
Well, Jace, you and I will take this up at some other time. I was not a fan of the extension, and you and I have gone back and forth on that. We won't get into that here. Couturier is a fine player, but still, I don't see the need why, when we need high-end talent, we're extending average players. That's the point I'm trying to make.
But you're not insinuating that he's an average player.
Sounds like you, Jace. You value Couturier more than I do. Mm-hmm. We'll leave it at that now. I don't think he's a legit number one center. I think he's a decent two center, and and we don't have a number one center, and we've extended.
Ideally, I guess your number one center is that dynamic, really.
That's right.
He's not a dynamic player.
No, he's not. And the real question is, how do we? And I don't trust this general manager to do it at all. How do we, with this mismanagement of the cap, acquire that high-end talent? That's the question for the group, and I'd love to hear the answers, because I don't have the first clue, and I don't think Chuck Fletcher does either.
Yeah, it's a really hard question, because most teams, when you have high-end talent, you're not looking to get rid of it.
Right.
It's the one thing, getting game breakers is a difficult thing, because you spend so much time, and if you're bad, you want to come out of being bad with one, and then you're certainly not going to trade it and put yourself back in that position. So it is hard to get. I mean, maybe you can find the rare hockey trade where, a team is constructed poorly, maybe like a Toronto. I look at
you love Marner, right?
Yeah, I love Marner, because I don't think you can get Matthews, but they don't trade Marner because they don't know if they're extending Matthews at this point. So there's those elements to it. How do you get it? You got to draft it and develop it. And, the best case scenario, obviously, is to draft at the top of the draft, because that's, that's where the higher pedigree players are. It's not to say it's a guarantee. Pasternak was taken 25th, right? There's other players. I just brought up Braden Point, taken 79th, and Kucherov 58th. You can find those. I mean, Joe Pavelski was taken in the 7th round. Now that's the 3 draft. That's like
Chase, where are our guys like that? What guy have we done that with? I can't think of any.
Well, not since Drew. Yeah.
Well, Drew was a first rounder, guys. He was a first round pick.
Yeah, but he wasn't a high first round pick. He was like
the 20s.
Yeah. He wasn't projected to become the player that he became.
Fair.
And that's, people didn't see him that way because of the skating, but the one thing they couldn't see real well when he was playing in junior was just the insane hockey IQ. Was like just off. That's why he's still able to do it now, even though he's lost a step.
Correct.
His brain makes up for everything his body is lost. So where do you get it? That's the question. Cutter Gauthier is a guy. He's having a great year at BC, but there's a lot to prove there. Obviously, I wouldn't mind if he went back to college. I don't want people to think that it was the wrong pick if he went back to college. Owen Power went back to college. A lot of guys go back to college for a second year. But how they get that is going to be, I think, the biggest key. And you can't just go, it's not the old NHL where you can just go buy your way out. The interesting, let's talk about, the approach going into this year, because they hired Tortorella. And everybody said Torts is going to have them playing hard. They're going to screw up their draft position. And some people look at it now. There's a conflict with a lot of fans that they're winning too much in their draft position in a draft with Bedard and Fantilli and Michkov and Leo Carlson on down the line, that you got these great players and they have a real good opportunity to miss out on that. How do you guys feel about the notion of tanking? Because I went through it on Flyers Daily, maybe even here yesterday. Only one first overall pick since 2008 has won a cup, and that's Nathan McKinnon.
Yeah.
No other team has won a cup. Tavares all the way down through Slafkovsky last year. There was a run there about 5 years in a row where they all did, with Stamkos and Crosby and Ovechkin, even Eric Johnson. So how do you guys feel about, let's start with you, Bri. How do you feel about the team winning some games right now?
Yeah, so heading into the season, Jason, I wasn't thrilled with the Tortorella hire. I thought just what you said, he was going to get them to be just good enough to be out of that realm of picking one of those generational talent.
Who did you want, by the way?
What's that?
Who did you want them to hire?
I really liked Monty and Boston. Obviously, they're doing great with him, so we probably would have ended up in the same spot. Winning a little bit more than we thought.
He's a good coach.
He's a really good coach. He's a really, really good coach. That said, as the season's gone on here, I've kind of fallen in love a little bit with the idea of Tortorella. I think I don't think Tortorella is the coach that you win the cup with. I think he is the guy that bridges you to that. I think he's the guy that sets the standard for the team and how to play. But then the tricky part is you have to have the front office in place after that can get creative enough to find high-end talent. So we talk about assets a lot. And most of the time when we talk about assets, we're talking about prospects or draft picks. But if you think about the way this team's currently constructed and the steps that some of these guys have taken this year, Tortorella is building assets. By my count, there are 7. If we're going to count Cates and Hayes as wingers, there are 7 or 8 guys on this team that are middle 6 wingers, and good middle 6 wingers at that. Those are the guys that the Torontos of the world need. And so you're building these assets. There's 7 or 8 middle 6 wingers on this team for 4 spots. Not to mention Gauthier coming, who, he could be a winger, he could be a center. And then you have Forrester down in the AHL. So Tortorella's been...
And Brink.
Yeah, and Brink. I forgot about Brink, yeah.
Right.
Tortorella's teaching these guys to play the game the right way. And while that's getting them to be just good enough to not get, one of these top 5 picks in this year's draft, you are positioning yourself to have these assets on the NHL roster that in the event that a high-end talent player becomes available, they're in that rare situation where they have a bevy of NHL-ready, solid middle 6 players that they can attach to picks to get that high-end talent in. When the DeBrincat becomes available, or, if it's Brock Besner, players like that. But Besner, I don't know as a high end, but he's got ceiling there. He's got floor middle 6. So maybe that's just another one of those guys. But I think there's a path forward with what Tortorella is doing to find that. You just need a front office that's going to be creative enough to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can use those pieces. And I think what this season has been, Mitchell, has been, reestablishing value in NHL pieces. And why you don't have high-end guys, you're right. I totally agree. You're right. You have a ton of guys that they will have a team that has all the pieces except the high-end talent if they don't acquire it. The makings of a really good playoff team, with the exception of that elite talent.
Right.
And some teams have the elite talent, but they don't have all that other stuff.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
They just don't have it. And so, you look at it, and, Mitch, were you in favor of the Torts hire? Were you a guy that wanted him, or Trotz, or Monty? I remember mentioning Monty, and a lot of people told me I was an idiot. And I was like, well, he's a good coach. And they're like, yeah, that'd be just another retread. I mean, look what the guy's doing in Boston. Yeah, he's got a good team. But where were you for hiring a coach, and where are you now on Torts? Has your opinion changed?
Yeah, I was for it then, and I am still for it. I loved the hire. Because I think you guys are exactly right. It's about building the foundation and the morals and the the culture of what we've been lacking for like the past decade or so. My dad always says, like, man, like, these games are just boring to watch. And for a lot of years there, he was spot on, because they were boring to watch. No one was out
low
there
event
grinding.
hockey.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. And I do feel like this year there's been games, maybe towards the beginning it was still a little bit like that, but man, like the past couple weeks, the past month or so, they've been battling, which is what I like. And as a player, I was like a battler. I was a small little guy, but I was still, like,
Because you can respect that.
Right? Yeah, 100%. So I loved the hire at first, and I think he's done everything that I kind of wanted him to do in establishing some of that culture, holding guys, both veteran and younger guys, accountable, and making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page. It does kind of stink that we're playing our way out of, one of those top end draft picks. I mean, hopefully, the lottery would be awesome if we can, move up a couple or whatever, but at the end of the day, I think the culture is kind of the most important thing, because you can have a team of good players. I mean, you still want that high-end talent, but you can still have a team of good players that can do some damage and eventually win something if they're all playing the right way. Because it's not just a one guy's sport. It is a team sport. You do need that high-end talent, but the culture is going to be the thing that takes you to that top. I mean, you saw it last year with the Avalanche. Nathan McKinnon set that culture, because you hear about how much work he does and how he holds everyone accountable. Right. So
and a coach that was on the same page with him in Bednar.
Right. Huge. Yeah.
Yep.
And he seems
Massive.
like a really good coach there. So that culture to me is just everything. I think that's huge. And I think he's building that, which I think is important, because we can add players in, but without the culture, a high-end talent player isn't going to be able to do, anything.
Yeah. Some people say, Danny, culture schmulture. Give me skill and that'll win, but it doesn't. I mean, look at Edmonton. They got two of the best players on planet Earth in McDavid and Draisaitl, and they're in danger of not making the playoffs again. And the culture there for so long was after 5 winning of the lottery, from having Taylor Hall and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Nail Yakupov and obviously McDavid in 15, getting Draisaitl high in the draft, but not the top spot. And it hasn't led them to anywhere. It's astounding.
You guys, Brian, you made a great point about, you guys made some great points about Tortorella and about how he's making a lot of these young kids better. So I won't repeat all that, but I've been and Jason, I know you were a fan of hiring him. I
mentioned him on the pregame broadcast.
Yeah.
When they played the Colorado Avalanche, because he was fired that morning after the 7-1 loss against the Tampa Bay Lightning on that Sunday night.
Yeah, I guess I can see both sides. I'm a little conflicted. I'm here in New York, so I watched him and Larry Brooks go at it for years up here. And I was a guy, guys, just so you know, that when he was in Columbus, if I saw Columbus blew a late lead, I'd run to my phone to watch the post-game press conference to see how out of control he was. So I've always had a fascination with Tortorella and the media, which is a whole separate subject, but I like, they're more competitive, they're more interesting, no question about it. He doesn't care who you are. He sits guys. He's a no BS kind of guy. But then there's the other side of what you guys covered about, where now we remain in the mushy middle, and we remain without high-end talent. So I'm a little conflicted by the hire.
Who would you want?
If I can jump in, I just think that, to that point, that mushy middle, like, again, you just have to be creative to get out of it. Like, they were not in the mushy middle in 2007. They were in the cellar. And then, of course, we don't get Patrick Kane. But you had a general manager who I don't think gets enough credit in Paul Holmgren.
I agree.
That had maybe one of the most creative, if not the most creative, not just off season, but in season. That second half of that season, they got Marty Biron. They flipped Forsberg for assets that turned into Hartnell and Timonen.
Biron kind of turns into Briere, too.
Exactly. So
it's the recruitment.
You just need that creativity to get out of the mushy middle. And it's not easy, but it's possible. We've seen it.
Well, Brian, with all due respect, that Holmgren thing was before the salary cap. So that's
that was cap.
No, that's salary cap.
That's
salary
cap.
That's early salary cap.
I stand.
Yeah, salary cap came in after the lockout or before.
Fair enough, guys. I'll say this though: I have zero confidence this GM has any kind of creativity to do that.
No, we agree on that, Dan.
and I hope I'm wrong. I hope and pray I'm wrong, and you guys can play this for me later on when we're attending a Stanley Cup parade.
But no, you're right. I mean, they trade Forsberg for the rights, or not Forsberg. How did they get the rights?
Forsberg went for Perrant and picks, right?
Yeah, and then they traded
Perrant went with Forsberg.
Scotty Upshaw was part of that too, I think.
Yeah.
And they traded it back to Nashville to get the rights to Timonen and Hartnell.
Correct.
Yes.
And now you've got your core because you drafted Gagne and developed him. And then you get Briere, and then you have Timonen and Hartnell. You have your anchor on the blue line. Then you add to that. I mean, he also put off the deal to get Pronger. And, it's a shame that Pronger, the injury happened, and that derailed his career and ended it way early, because they could have used more Chris Pronger for more years. But I mean, I remember the draft night deal that was made, Lucas Spiza the first and everything that went. And it was like, I was on the air at WIP at the time, and I got a call from Zach Hill, and he's like, "Hey, we just traded for Chris Pronger. You want him on the air?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah." And it was, I mean, you look at some of those teams, and those teams were always competitive, and they were always pushing at that time to make some big shit happen. And most often they did. I mean, you can look at 2010 as an outlier. That was a really good team under Lavi, once Lavi came in and got it straightened out. Dan, who did you want them to hire as the coach?
Trotz would have been great. Montgomery's fine. I'm not a huge coaching guy. I'm more, as you guys can tell now, focused on the front office piece. But Tortorella's done a great job, guys. They're competing way harder. They're in games now. He's done his job.
Yeah, I think you made a good point too, Bri, about he might. I don't know if he's the guy. He's won a cup, obviously. Everywhere he's been, he has taken over. Usually when a new coach comes in, the team's probably not very good because he got fired. It's not a situation like Quenneville to last year in Florida, and then, handing off a President's Trophy winning team to Andrew Burnett, who ended up getting fired anyway. But you look at it and you go, everywhere he's been, it's been this process of finding out who's who and what's what, keeping the guys, building on it. And he's a guy that rides a GM very hard. He makes it very clear what he wants, what he needs. So that's part of the equation as well. So let's talk about some of those young guys. And I want to start with one of the most polarizing guys, and start with you, Mitchell, because he's playing good of late, no doubt about it. And it's Morgan Frost. But I mean, if you pay attention to social media, and I know you guys do, I mean, you see, and maybe you've tweeted it. If people say, get rid of him, he stinks, he's never going to be any good. The arc of development of a hockey player is never a straight line, and it doesn't match anyone else's. He's starting to play really well now, and you see that skill that's there to pull off that goal the other night with both feet below the goal line in that spot. It's a crazy goal. That shows you a confident player. He's got to do it for much longer. I mean, this is a small sample size where he's been playing well. But what are you thinking of guys like Frost, Tippett in particular?
Yeah, Frost is polarizing for sure, right? We were all hype on him as he was coming into the league. I mean, if you looked at his numbers in juniors, it mirrored Drew's very similarly, right? And I'm not comparing that, but those numbers were there kind of similar to that. And then things kind of got derailed by COVID, right? He had a rocky couple years there, not being able to really develop. And I think that hurts him. I think a lot of those guys in that age range, lost some development and they're trying to catch up now, which I think we're seeing. You're absolutely right. I think we need to see that more consistent. I think you've said it, confidence is so huge for a creative player like that. And he's confident right now and he's producing, and it's awesome to see because it makes us feel a little bit better about talking him up a while ago. So I think the consistency is just where it needs to come in. He's got to build some of that resilience, that mental resilience in when something doesn't go his way or he has a couple bad games, that he can, turn it around quicker and not go into those large, slumps that he's been, that he's done a couple times. A lot of those younger players kind of do that, right? Tippett, is a little streaky right now, but he's been playing pretty good as of late, pretty positively, confident, using his body, driving the net. York, I think I mentioned him a couple times already, but I think he's kind of that same way. Like when he's confident, he's doing it. So I think a lot of the young guys have been playing pretty well recently, and the confidence and the consistency is just where we need to see, because if they can remain at what they've been doing for the past month or two, I think we're in a pretty, those guys are in a pretty solid spot to continue.
Yeah, finding out who's who and what's what, Dan, is the big thing this year. Finding out what Tippett is. He comes in that Giroux trade and didn't have a lot of NHL success down in Florida. Just couldn't break through there. There wasn't a spot for him to do so. Him being here now, to me, he looks like a player that has skills different than I thought. He's such a good skater. I mean, for a big frame guy, he can really fly up and down the ice. So what are you seeing with some of the young guys that we're trying to find out what they are at the NHL?
And I am optimistic there. I'm not completely negative, guys, but I'd say the four young guys that I have my eye on are certainly Frost and Cates, York and Tippett. I mean, I think those guys are keepers. Guys, Morgan Frost is a particularly interesting case. I'm not necessarily a fan, but again, if you watch the last couple of games here, I mean, there's no question the kid's got high-end talent, which is what we obviously need. I would hate to paint the scenario, guys, where they don't re-sign this kid. They let him walk, and he finds his game somewhere else. Flyers Twitter will collapse. Yeah. So I don't know if not signing him is a great deal.
I don't think that's in the cards at all. I don't think that could. You're not going to just not sign him. I mean, you would trade him.
Right. So I do see some of the kids, the progression under Torts being encouraging for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely been a step forward for a lot of those guys. Brian, when you look at it, you talked about it. Some of those guys may be used as assets. Guys, ways to pull in other guys because they're so young in their career. They're not making a lot of money, and teams that I got a ton allocated up front. Maybe that's the way to pry a piece loose.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a guy like Tip, and he, his floor is probably a third line winger, and I'd say his ceiling is probably a second line winger. I don't think he's a first line guy, but that is an extremely valuable player. And then even the more veteran guys like TK, who I'm not looking to trade, but his floor is a second line winger, and is what he's doing this year. Is that smoke and mirrors? Is that who he is? I tend to believe it's who he is. So that's a first line player. There's talent there. There are guys that are taking steps forward. Looking at a guy like Frost, I've seen enough this year that I'd want to give him another year to see what he does with another full year with Tortorella and this team under his belt. Can he be a 3C in this league? I don't know that he's proved that he can be yet. I don't know that the consistency has been there enough to be a 3C in this league. He's not a fourth line player. And does he still have second line ceiling? I'm not so sure about that anymore either, but it goes a long way if he can prove that he's a 3C in this league. It goes a long way in shoring up your roster down the middle, because say Couturier comes back, and even if he's not quite the Sean Couturier of old, he's still a very, very good second line center. And then you could slot Cates back, who, by the way, I should say that guy's got to be my favorite player on the team right now. He is so technically sound on the ice. It's just he doesn't make mistakes. Yeah, he doesn't make mistakes. I've never seen anything like him with a guy coming out of the NCAA and playing like that. But then you can slot him back onto the wing, and then again you have this dearth of wingers that you can really use to fill in the rest of your lineup, whether that's finding that high-end talent or solidifying your blue line a little bit more. It's not all murky water ahead. There is a path here, and the development of these young guys has been, I'm not just saying that to you, Dan, but the path here is it's there if you want to look hard enough.
Yeah. What about Carter Hart? What are we feeling about Carter Hart? Because that's the thing. Sam Emerson was sent down today, by the way, because Sandstrom's got to go through waivers, and some people go, well, let him go through waivers. He gets plucked. Who cares? Well, then Troy Grosnick's hurt down there too. You can't have enough goalie depth. You could be tapping on my shoulder soon to come and play in the coast, because somebody that doesn't belong in the AHL needs to go up. So, the thought of trading Carter Hart to me is almost insane.
It's stupid.
Yeah. Especially in this market where the goalie thing has been like, the unicorn that we've been trying to find. And all of a sudden now you've got a kid that as the team gets better around him, his numbers will get even better and better. And we know he's a good goalie. So Mitchell, where do you stand on Hart and the goalie situation?
Yeah, I stand at absolutely not. We're not moving Carter Hart unless, which I feel like I see this all the time and I don't know where it's coming from.
David.
Yeah, I see Draisaitl all the time. And I don't know if they're, I don't think that's real at all. If we could get Draisaitl for a package with Carter Hart, I think I make that trade. But outside of that, I don't think we even mess with it. I think with what we've seen this year between Hart and Urson, I think we have our tandem for the next couple of years. I think that could be a really strong A-B goalie. The people that, went straight to let's trade Carter Hart for a guy that we've seen play 5 or 6 games is asinine to me. But it is exciting having someone, having a young goalie come in and play the way that Urson did. He really played pretty soundly, except for that first game, which I don't necessarily put all on him. So that is really exciting. But I think we stand pat with Carter Hart and we keep him here, but we got to support him. We got to give him the team in front of him, which we haven't done for his entire career so far. So that's the most important thing, that we don't waste what we have in net right now, because I don't think a goalie comes along too often where he can steal a game like Carter can.
Yeah, I don't think a Hart Urson goalie tandem long term is the answer. I really don't, and here's why: because Erson's going to want to be a starter at some point, just like Bobrovsky did.
Yep.
When they had Brizgalov, he didn't see a path to being a starter, so he wasn't going to re-sign. So that's why they had to trade him.
I think you just have to be careful with it. So the net is the one thing that I wouldn't touch. For everything else is on the table for me. TK, everybody is on the table, but the net's the one thing that I don't touch for at least through next season, because you've seen situations before where Jonathan Quick's at the top of his game, and who was it? Bernier that was behind him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, let's trade Jonathan Quick because we have this guy coming. Well, that wasn't that wasn't the right move to make.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're glad they didn't make it.
And Quick's
Luongo and
still
Schneider
playing.
in Vancouver. Like, trade Luongo. Schneider's coming. Well, Schneider can't sniff Luongo's jock. Like,
Well, same thing in LA with Cal Peterson. And it's the hardest position to predict. It's like voodoo, and when you got a guy, and goalies are so capable of going on a heater and then not being that. We've seen it time and time again, whether it's Andrew Hammond, the Hamburglar, Jim Carrey back in the day.
Wow.
So, there's tons of them. Sustainability at the NHL level is the goalie is the key. So, Danny, you're good on the goalie situation, right?
Well, yeah, JC, you and I have gone back and forth on the goalies. We can maybe have a separate show on the goalies entirely, but no, to be clear though, I am a huge Carter Hart fan. And for years, this franchise has looked for a franchise goalie. Now we might have two. I mean, Ersan has looked terrific in a limited role. I totally understand. My only qualifier with Hart, and Jason, I've mentioned this to you, is, where we drafted him and coming out of the Canadian program and all the accolades. He's a terrific young goalie, but he might be the third best goalie in our division, guys. My point there is just that while I think he's terrific, and in the bubble he was unbelievable, and he's a terrifically sound goalie. Jason, you bring this up all the time. Is he an elite goalie today in the league? I don't think he is. If you ask any hockey pundit, he's not a top 5 goalie in the league. My point is, if something came along to acquire high-end talent and Sam Ersan had 50 NHL games under his belt, I'd listen. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way you prove if you're a leader or not is in the playoffs, and he's only had the one playoff run. He was great in it.
He was.
So he played well under that spotlight. That's where that status is earned to me in regular seasons. And I mean, it's great to do well there, but I mean, the reason why Vasilevsky's a legend is the game 7s, where, I mean, I think he gave up. He's lost like 1 out of his last 10 game 7s.
Yeah.
It's
insane. Yeah.
Or not even game 7s. It's just closeout games. He had like 6 out of 7 games were shutouts. I mean, just absurd.
Ridiculous.
Otherworldly.
Yeah. I mean, then you see goalies like Matt Murray with Pittsburgh, who, was really good in that structure, lost his way. And a goalie can lose his way. He lost his way, and the way he played, and the game developed in a way that didn't help him with more East-West. So with Hart, it'll be interesting to see how the whole thing does play out, and, going forward with him. And but again, you got to put the team in front of him. I think the structure has benefited him a little bit this year. All right, guys, let's get to our last thing, our kind of our closing thoughts here. And this is really simple. What's the plan moving forward? And let's start with you, Mitchell. What's the Mitchell plan moving forward?
The plan moving forward. It's tough, right? Because there's a couple different directions. Do you scrap it and whatever? But I think we get what we can from some of our expiring assets this season. I think we're like 5 to 7 good creative moves, and emphasize on the good creative, because we can't keep making these mediocre moves. But I think we're 5 to 7, good creative moves from being somewhere that's exciting. And I don't know if that means the top of the league, but it means somewhere exciting, right? So we move who we can this year at the deadline, JVR. If we can get something for Hayes, where we're holding the cap and we get some value back for him, that might be something to worth, because it also improves our draft spot. Ideally this year gives us a chance to play some more of the younger kids, more than we already have on the roster already, which I just think, again, it allows us to see who we have and who's a part of the plan moving forward. So let's let's buy into getting assets to make our team younger and more skilled. And the stopgaps that we've been using for the past couple of years, I'm fed up with it. I'm done with it. So I want a clear direction. I think the first step, like Dan has mentioned a couple of times, find a new GM, right? Like we need someone at the helm that is not vanilla like Chuck Fletcher is. We need someone creative,
Yep.
like what Yzerman did down in Tampa, that they're reaping all the success from, like someone, I forget who's the GM of the Rangers right now, but someone that's creative that can work other GMs.
Rory.
Yeah. Sure.
So, someone that can work other GMs instead of us getting, I feel
a lot
like
of that work was done by Jeff Gordon, but yeah.
True.
Yeah.
True.
So,
the Rangers rebuild's a little different too, because they send a letter to the fans and we're going to take a step back, and they trade McDonough, and then they trade all these players, but then Panarin goes, "I'm coming to New York." He was only going to New York. They knew that.
Yeah.
So part of those trades were that letter was a little disingenuous, knowing they had to clear the cap space so they could sign Panarin, and then Fox forced his way there. And then you have Shesterkin coming over to Rye's point that, or Dan's point that, the goalies in the division. I mean, Shesterkin and Sorokin. I don't know if people know that about Sorokin as much as they know about Shesterkin yet, but Sorokin may end up being better.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And Flyers have a guy over there right now doing the same thing those guys did at the same age, and Kolosov. He's been playing 3 years now in the KHL, has very similar to those guys' numbers at the same age too. So another guy that could be on the come for the Flyers in net, and you can never have enough there. Danny, what's the plan moving forward? Let me guess. You're going to start with the general manager. Well, you're going to start with the owner.
I'm not going to mention the owner, the general manager. I'm just going to move on from that. But that is certainly part of my plan. And my other part of my plan is really twofold, guys. It's easy. We need to clear cap space and acquire high-end talent. Very simple. It's simply said, it's hard to do. I'm not saying it's simple to do, but they need to somehow get rid of some of these deals. I don't know how. Chuck Fletcher's not the guy to do it. And they need to hire, get a Larkin, get a Pasta. They got to get a guy like that in Philadelphia. As to how to do that, I don't know.
Larkin's an interesting one. I like him. You're not going to get Pasternak. There's no way they let him walk. They'd be fools. He's just so insane. But Larkin is, careful though, dealing with Yzerman. There's certain GMs I go, just be careful dealing with that guy. You know what I mean?
Right.
You could think you're getting. You could think you got a deal. And you got the good end of it, and you find out that no, you do something that I didn't. Brian, what's the plan?
Yeah, so I think I've said it a couple times now, but there needs to be a level of creativity that I don't think Chuck Fletcher has. I'll give him and Flair a lot of credit that I do think they are solid drafters. Not great, but solid. Their picks hit. They're NHL players. I would leave the goal alone, like I said, for at least a whole season here beyond this one, because you have stability there, and why mess with that? But then, just finding creative hockey trades. You look at a team like Vancouver that it's like the Flyers and the Canucks are competing to see who can be more of a dumpster fire at certain times. But there's trades to be had there. We have so much depth at left-handed defense. You take a Sanheim or a Provorov and you bring a Besner in, and that opens up spots for guys when they're ready on our left hand, on the left-handed side D. I actually am in favor of trading both Provorov and Sanheim because I think they're both second pair defensemen, and I think Cam York's a second pair defenseman, and they all play the left side. So
Yorkie's been playing the right side a bit.
He's been playing the right side, but I think he's just a better player on the left side.
Mm-hmm. There's advantages in the offensive zone to being on the right side, and there's a disadvantages to being on the right side defensively, because your stick's in the middle of the ice, and you end up on your backhand on certain rims and stuff like that too. So
absolutely. But
he said he should play defensive center. When I told him, I said, "Why don't you just play on the right side in the offensive zone and on the left side defending?" And he said, he said Frosty suggested that he should be a defensive center.
I love that. I would, but you take Provorov, for example, and I don't think, not getting into that, but I don't think he's really tradable until at least the offseason now. That's definitely not an in-season move, and probably wasn't before anyway.
Yeah, agreed.
But you look at a team like LA that has a lot of solid right-handed defenseman prospects that, and you might be able to get a pick back for him too. He's cost controlled. He's got a little bit of term, and the guy's a good player. He's a good NHL defenseman.
The thing about him too, he's always available.
Absolutely. Plays every game.
Yeah, if I'm a GM, I'm not trading for a guy. I don't know if he's going to be on the ice or not.
No, he might not warm up, but at least he's going to play in the game. But yeah, I had to sneak that in there. Sorry, Jay.
Very good. Very good.
That was well placed.
Very
But
fun.
I think there's a path there. I think you get rid of that logjam on the left side of your defense a little bit. Maybe bolster the right side of your defense a little bit. I've actually come around on Ristolainen somewhat. The guy's playing good defense
In the right role.
He's not a $5 million a year player, but they paid market for him, and he's playing good defense now. And then, to what Dan said, you got to find a way to get rid of some cap. To me, that's Kevin Hayes, and that might mean eating some money. Yep. But this team is, he's got, 3 years on his deal after this one? This team ain't winning a cup in 3 years. So if you can get a little bit of cap space in that 3 years and maybe get an asset back from him, even if you don't, and open up some cap, that goes towards re-signing a guy like Besner if you get Besner. So, I mean, it's this spider web that I have in my head, this conspiracy theory of crazy. But Paul Holmgren did it, so I think there's
the other thing. That'll be the last thing I mention here, and then we'll wrap up, is that Flyers fans are so conditioned that when there's a shiny toy, you have to go get it. Why are we conditioned that way? Because that's what happened for
years,
decades and decades, right? It didn't matter who it was, whether it was Adam Oates or Dale Hawerchuk or Paul Coffey. I mean, you could put together an alumni team of right guy, wrong time Flyers that is Hall of Fame worthy. Yep. I'm not going to put Forsberg in that because he still had more than a point per game. I think he had 120 points in 100 games as a Flyer. He couldn't find a skate to fit his fucking foot and stay on it right, and he still dominated. But that guy's a freak show, right? But we're conditioned that when there's something available, they got to be in the mix to get it. Right. They got to, which was why this summer with Gaudreau and DeBrincat and everybody was freaking out. I think most people would see now. I know some don't, but that getting Gaudreau was not the right thing to do for this team. A 29-year-old undersized winger that it wasn't going to help them. I mean, look at the standings right now. You look at the fact that the Flyers, without Gaudreau and without Couturier and without Atkinson, which we didn't know at the time, that Atkinson and Couturier wouldn't be available, the Flyers are way ahead of them in the standings. And I know they're injured too. Flyers have had their share. Flyers actually have more man games lost to injury than Columbus has, but he hasn't fixed anything there.
True.
One player's not going to do that. Get Columbus 20. I mean, Jesus Christ, 28. Flyers have 45 points. Columbus has 28 points.
I think they're behind Chicago now. I think they fell behind Chicago.
Last night they did. Chicago's now got 30. They're the worst team in the league.
Yeah.
And they're going to get Bedard, and they'll go, oh, see, you should have got Gaudreau because you could have ended up with Bedard. You'll make that leap on me.
I can't wait for that tweet to come across your board there, Jay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just trying to ignore as many as I can, but it's tough. Guys, you guys did awesome, man. This was so much fun. I got a message here from Michael. Says, thank you for doing this and giving the fans a voice on the Stick of Hockey. Boys, you're doing great. Stick taps to all. Great job. I got a text message from Raider Frank. You guys know Raider Frank?
Yep.
No.
He's a lunatic on Twitter. But he's awesome. He's a great guy. And he said, these guys are great, Jason. They really prepared and are all very well spoken, smart, nice. Level-headed guys. He said everybody but Danny. No, I'm just kidding. He didn't say that. But no,
Jason,
great job.
This is a blast, man.
Yeah.
Jason, thank you so much, Jason. Really appreciate this. Thank you.
Awesome stuff. So there we got Mitchell on the bottom left. Out in Pittsburgh, we got Brian. In the bottom right, looking like he's hanging out at Michael Corleone's compound there. And we got Danny up in we're North Jersey now, Danny?
I'm in Manhattan right now, but yes, North Jersey is where I live. Yeah.
Awesome job, guys. Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Jason. Thank you so much.
There it is. The first Flyers Fan Forum. God damn, that was fun. Great job. We're going to do more. So if you want to get involved in it, shoot me a DM. Don't shoot me a DM and just say, hey, Jason, I want to be on the panel. Give me a little like reasoning. Like these guys I already know because I correspond with them on Twitter and I can look and see their stuff. If you're an egg on Twitter and you just say, I'd like to do it, and we haven't corresponded before, I need more. Like I'm not just going to grab somebody. So just give me a little something. And I got some from some people yesterday, some good candidates as well. So everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll do another one of these next Friday, and we'll have another great week of hockey talk coming up on Monday. Busy weekend of hockey. Detroit tomorrow. Sunday, the Flyers are back home against the Peg. So we'll have a lot to discuss coming up next week on a brand new episode of Stick to Hockey Live. Everybody have a great weekend. Leave us a 5-star rating and review, and we'll talk to you next week on Stick to Hockey Live.